very happy to be part of such an esteemed collection. I didn't know there were 80 pieces. I didn't walk around far enough, I guess. I don't know. I was really pleased that Font has a permanent home. It's a piece that should be used by people, sat on, walked on, touched. And its location seems to be just right here. It's in the middle of where people walk and congregate, and I couldn't be more pleased with the quality of the installation. I wasn't here. I just had to trust, and sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't, but it really did now, and I'm very, very happy.
So I just have the great pleasure this evening of welcoming you all here and to introduce Ksenia Gerstein, our curator of modern and contemporary art, who has an absolutely beautiful introduction planned for you, Elyn. So please. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I guess you gave it away, that it's not going to be extemporaneous. Okay. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's really lovely to have all of you here. And thank you to those of you who came out to the dedication earlier who were able to make it. It was a really lovely thing to have witnessed and to now have officially added Elyn Zimmerman's font to the Martin H. Bush Outdoor Sculpture Collection. And we're very fortunate to have Elyn with us in person tonight to talk about the ways that font fits into the larger arc of her long and very illustrious artistic career. Elyn Zimmerman received her BFA and MFA degrees from UCLA, where she focused on painting and photography. Early in her career, she created a number of temporary installations rooted in kind of land art ideas about the landscape as both site and landscape and site as both medium and support. And venues for her site-specific work and temporary works have included Art Park in Lewiston, New York, Berkeley Art Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, PS1 in Long Island City before it was part of MoMA, and the 1980s Olympics in Lake Placid. It was after a fateful trip to India, which I imagine Elyn might mention tonight in her talk, that a decades-long love affair with stone began. Pairing stone, particularly granite, this very hard substance, with its natural frenemy, water, Elyn has been commissioned to create permanent installations for a variety of civic, university, and corporate sites. These include installations at the National Geographic headquarters in Washington, D.C., the AT&T headquarters in New Jersey, the Dade County Courthouse in Miami, and the Moffitt Cancer Center at the University of South Florida in Tampa, as well as the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And what I love about it is that, you know, she works with these sites. Some of them are very mundane. Some of them are sites of, you know, where people experience a lot of pain, like the cancer center. Some of them are, you know, the courthouse, where I imagine people experience a very different kind of pain. And, while working on those site-specific commissions, Elyn has continued to make standalone sculptures like Font, which has now found this really beautiful permanent home here in Wichita. Her work is remarkable, and that's what I started to say about the really broad variety of sites and spaces with different purposes. And her work is remarkable in that it turns these potentially nondescript or even unpleasant public spaces that are, you know, filled with hustle and bustle and quotidian life into sites of really exquisite beauty and stillness. They're physically grand, her installations and works, and spiritually expansive, connecting us both to the grandeur of nature and to the kind of depths that each of us contains within. Among her many honors, Elyn was a commissioner of the Washington, D.C. Commission for Fine Arts from 2003 to 2008, and most recently a recipient of the Isamu Noguchi Award from the Noguchi Museum in New York. We are delighted to have her here today, and I hope you all will help me welcome Elyn Zimmerman.
hope this works. Okay. I'm going to start with a number of projects from 2004 going forward, because it just got too long to do all the stuff that I did in the 80s and the 90s. So somebody just tell me what button I push to go forward. Ah, got it. Okay, all right. So there's a program with the State Department and a private organization called the Foundation for Art and Preservation of Embassies. And around the world, U.S. embassies have always had two-dimensional art in the embassy, but this particular group is also working with sculptors to do projects in the construction of new embassies. And one of the new embassies, or rebuilt, is the one in Dar es Salaam. You might remember that the embassy in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were attacked and destroyed in 2000, or 1999 or 2000. So I start off in my studio and I make little models, and these models are very casual. They're foam core, tracing paper. I cut figures out of magazines at the right scale. And at the site, which is, this is the site, the architects who built it, there was a long water rill, very, very long, that went all through the gardens. It's like 180 feet long, very long. And this is the central entrance, will be the central entrance. So I used, there isn't a pointer, is there? The laser pointer? Oh, anyway. I can walk. It's okay. Never mind. Okay, I won't point, but I should also mention that all these sculptures and things that FAPE commissions, the artist is expected to donate their time and energy and ideas, and private citizens pay the bills for the construction. So it's not like a big corporation that has a lot of money. So we used the entry to the embassy, and then around what was going to be an existing pool, we made this pool a little larger. And I believe in using, if possible, local materials. So the closest granite to Tanzania comes from South Africa. And it's a beautiful South African sort of red. So I went to a dealer, and there are stone dealers. You go to these dealers, you arrange for a block to be shipped. I fabricated it in Minnesota at Cold Spring Granite Company, and then shipped it back. So the material isn't expensive. It's moving it around that seems to be the real expense. So I was working with, the installers were all local people, and it was interesting because they do not have what we know as OSHA in there. Okay, so just to explain how you're solving problems all the time. They don't have earthquakes in that part of the world so much, but they wanted to make sure that everything was going to be able to stand upright. And those steel posts, they wanted to be able to cement the granite to the post. So how would you do that? You can't exactly shoot cement up there because it's a pretty tight fit. What we came up with were balloons filled with cement on the top of the post. So when the granite was lowered down, it broke the balloon, created the cement, and that's how it worked. But that was something that happened on site. It's just, you never know. You know, you have, and sometimes you can't be that casual either. So I had gone to the Metropolitan Museum in New York has a wonderful collection of African art, and I did a lot of research about art in Tanzania and things. And I began to think about this sculpture as like a watering hole in a village, and figures would come and be around that. And I used the textures. You can see some of the stones have a kind of texture to them to represent that. And this is the water rill, and then it continues underneath the entry walkway and then all along the garden. Another project that followed right away was a place called the Institute for Advanced Study, which is where Einstein was brought to start up at school. And it's all, there's different sciences, and there's also humanities. But they have a beautiful 350-acre campus right next to Princeton University. And it's their 75th anniversary, and they wanted to do something to commemorate that. So there's a pond, and beyond the pond are these nature trails. So that is, again, a kind of photo montage of what I was thinking of. There are all these slender trees, and I thought how interesting if it looked like this long granite bench was like floating in space. And actually it's being held up by these poles, but there it is, installed. So you can see it, the idea of using what was around. I mean, right now with all the greenery in this picture, you don't see the tree trunks as clearly as you do in the fall and the winter. But there are inscriptions. I keep doing that. Okay. The inscriptions were taken from writings by the person who founded the Institute. His name was Flexner, Einstein, and another, one of the scholars who had been there a long time. So altogether, it's about 60 feet long. And when you walk through alongside it to the far end, that's where the entrance to the walking trails, 300 acres. It's just really beautiful property. On the basis of that, I was contacted by a committee from China who were doing the art program for the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing. And their plan was to ask 20 artists from around the world to make a proposal for sculpture. So I pride myself on not repeating things. Well, didn't work that way. I made 2 other proposals, and they rejected them both. They kept saying, we like what you did at the Institute of Fine Art, and Advanced Study, and if you can make some variation of that, we'll be happy. The other caveat was that everything had to be built in China with their facilities. So I came up with the idea, this is again one of my models with paper, and by now you're probably familiar with those little people I cut out because I use them over and over again. So if you take the Olympic rings, that symbol, the 5 rings, that's what those arcs are coming from. And they did an incredible job. I have to say, it was, first it was like pulling teeth. It was a little scary being there. Their facilities are not, if I thought Africa didn't know about OSHA, this was like way different. But they did great work, and it had to be all Chinese stone and steel and everything. So I was very pleased at the end, and that's part of the crew that worked with. As far as I know, they built these parks around the various event spaces, and I think they're still there. Of course, I have no contract about keeping it, or any of the pieces that they did. They had about 20 artists from all over. And then a recent project in New York was after 9/11. in Tribeca, the city realized that they needed to do something to revitalize the area. They needed to do a lot of things, but there were a number of small pieces of unused public land, and they decided they would ask artists and the Parks Department to collaborate and make little parks. So this is a triangle that runs along Canal Street. And Canal Street was actually a canal way back in the 17 whatever. Most of the New York City at that time was located towards where City Hall is, toward the eastern, what's called the East River. And the Hudson River was used as pretty much a dump site, you know. All these channels and things were carted off. Things were carted off to the Hudson because it had more of a tidal kind of wash. Anyway, Canal Street was a canal. So you can see it says Canal Street, and then there's Avenue of the Americas. It's here. And what's called Varick Street is actually further up is 7th Avenue. And then the idea that I came up with was to have a canal to celebrate Canal Street. And of course, it's going to be a park for people to use and enjoy all kinds of things. So this is a construction photograph. And well, you'll see in a second. The water comes out at the west end in an elevated kind of stone, it's a granite tower, and falls down and keeps falling. And it's very, it makes a wonderful sound because there's so much traffic, and it becomes a little bit of an oasis in a rough part of town. And it's pretty easy to maintain because it's all sort of gravity. You know, there's a pump room underneath all this, like there's a pump underneath Font. And it's, so there's a little school nearby, and somebody brought their students out. Oh, and these little iron things everywhere, skateboarders. Skateboarders love granite ledges. They love them, and of course they break them. And it looks like doo-doo after a while. It looks terrible. So we had to design. It's one of the things about public art. You have to think about all these things that don't necessarily factor into the general idea that you're celebrating, but you want to. And then after working with stone for 40 years, I was invited, and that project was finished in 2009-10, and a couple of years went by, and a couple more years went by, and there weren't any projects coming, and I was getting a little worried. And then the New Orleans Museum of Art called me, and they said, we're expanding our sculpture garden, and we'd like you to come down, and we're going to commission 2 works that are not sculptures to be put on stands or to be placed, but will be built into the fabric of the sculpture garden. So to serve a purpose. And one of the artists was commissioned to do there's a curved wall, and she did a ceramic mural for that wall. And I was asked to come down and think about doing a bridge. So there's the museum is in the center. It's that big white building. The existing sculpture garden is the green area to the left, and the new sculpture garden is the area to the right. And the red arrow indicates the bridge that I was asked to, So there's a couple, and like anything around Louisiana, around New Orleans, there is water everywhere. There are bayous, there's channels, there's this, that, and the other. So Lake Pontchartrain is just to the north. If you're thinking about up from the top of that picture, Lake Pontchartrain, and a lot of it is draining through all this place called City Park. There's all kinds of waterworks, and then it goes down to the Gulf or some of it might even go into the river, I don't know. And this is a more detailed plan, but it shows, you can see all of the landscape architects are really terrific, and they were the ones who really helped make this happen, because I don't have the facilities that they do to work with the engineers about the soils and this, that, and the other. So public art is always a collaboration, whether you're doing it for a private entity or some public agency. This is a private, this is financed by a donor in Louisiana who was very interested in creating this large sculpture park and leaving it to the people in the city. Anyway, I worked with the landscape architects who had made all these winding, beautiful pathways everywhere. Well, let me go back, because there I was, I looked at this place and I thought, I went out to see the site and I came away feeling totally shattered. This is no place for stone, nothing. I mean, there's nothing that stone could even sit on. It's mud, it's lagoons, it's turtles and Spanish moss and muck and just all this stuff. And I thought, a stone bridge is just not possible. It's not the right thing. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I finally get a nice commission for a wonderful museum, and I've got to go and say no. So I went back to my hotel in downtown New Orleans, and I'm walking around really feeling sad. And I go to a bookstore and I see these maps. This is one of a set of, well, there are many maps of the Mississippi River and its meander band, all these different colors, and you can see the bar on the left side. That bar represents 6,000 years of different layers of the riverbed meandering. All these different, there's like 20 different colors. And I saw that and I thought, that is absolutely stunning, and how can I make that into a bridge? And I thought about terrazzo and this, that, and the other, because I was thinking, and then it came to me, I live in New York, around the corner from the Apple store, and the first Apple store in New York, and they put in a glass stairway that is so beautiful that they used that as a symbol for all of their stores as much as they can. So I went out to talk to the guy who built the glass stairway, and he said, sure, we can do a bridge. Long story short, I knew nothing about glass. I had never worked with architectural glass. I didn't know anybody who did. I didn't know what came over me. And I said, okay, let's do a glass bridge. And the glass bridge will have embedded in it, because you can, it's called ceramic frit. You can bake the colors into the glass. Did I know anything about this? No. So I just say that one of the things that I really value, and I've always valued about being an artist, is that it leads you to experiment, to try new things, to say what if and not you can't, I mean, that's the important thing, that nothing would ever get done if you only did what you knew, There's something to be said about expertise, and we need that. But there's also something to be said about having an idea and finding somebody to help you fabricate it, which I was able to do. So this is a preliminary rendering. The bridge is 80 feet long and 6 feet wide. It's the V of the undercarriage. Where the V is where the water would be. It's about 5 feet up off the water. And it has railings. So I found a place in California. You have to cook these panels. They're made out of different layers. Each layer has a structural property. And they cook them and they kind of bake them and fuse them together. And all the tall glass pieces you see on high-rise buildings, they're all done the same way. But most of them are done either in China or in Germany, because they have these huge ovens. The largest oven, it's called something else, but I call it an oven, was in this place in California, so that's where I went. And they were very excited about doing this project. Then we decided, well, we're going to have a glass bridge and glass railings, why not light it? So because they're lighting everything in the sculpture garden, so they thought, so that's just an example of what might be. And this is while it's being fabricated, this is they drained the lagoon. What you see in there is rainwater. They took out all the fish, all the turtles. I don't know what to do with them, but they ecologically sound move to take them away. And so I wanted the steel support to be as light and invisible as possible. And when the water is in the lagoon, you won't see that crossbar under the bridge. And those straps are the things that had to be used to lift the glass panels in place. And I thought, great, all the guys, they got all the panels down, and then they said, we're going to break for lunch. So I said, good, I'll get something. And by the time I came back, they had wrapped everything because they didn't want it to get dirty or scratch. So I never really got a great picture. But this is a picture someone sent me from, and it will get dirty, and it'll have leaves on it, and then people will walk on it. But it has a top layer is a stippled surface, so you can't slide. It's, it's not gonna. And then I was going to show you some of the sculpture projects that I did in the intervening years. This was one of the first projects I did. Have you been to, in Minneapolis, General Mills has a sculpture garden. I don't know if you've been there, but it's very big, it's very nice. And this was one of the first pieces I did. And this was done with stone that was from the throwaway pile. I don't know, some of you heard me speak earlier that a lot of the granite I use, I worked at Cold Spring Granite, and they have tons of material that is not good enough for architecture. It's not clean enough. It has veins, or it has seams or whatever. And they throw it in these, they make these giant piles. They look like pyramids, really, just they go on and on forever. And I'd be there for weeks at a time working on something, and I'd start walking around looking at material in this pile, and they would, they were happy that I wanted to use it. So this was one of the first pieces that I did, and it uses these tall, thin slices that were not good for anything else. It's another picture of it. This is at Cold Spring. Put it together. It's 11 feet high and 22 feet long. It's not small, but it's, And then this was a project for the AT&T Conference Center. And these are two views. The one on the right is at the gallery that I was showing with at the time. And then, actually, they're both at the gallery. I don't know if I have a picture of it installed. But and this is a private commission for an art collector at their property in Kent, Connecticut. And I like to use the combination of polished and rough material. So the tall pillars are naturally clefted. They're not sculpted. They're broken by somebody who knows what they're doing, and it breaks in a clean way. And the black and the lighter color gray are cut with a saw and polished and refined. So what I like about working with stone is that it is right there. It's it. You see it, that's it. And it has different colors. You can use different textures. You can finish it in different ways. And I don't know, it has an integrity that I like. So this is another view of that. Where are we here? And then this is a project in Darien, Connecticut. Again, Cold Spring granite stone, but this is from a particular place in the Dakotas, and the stone is called Agate. and it's some of the oldest rock in the world. It's like scientists have come to date the rock. There's the continent of the United States and Canada have what's called a craton. It's the basis of the, it's a geological term. Anyway, this is some of the oldest stuff, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it's got all kinds of markings. And there's two rough pieces, and in the center is a polished panel, and water comes out of the top of the polished panel and falls in that pool. And then this was at the Gagosian Gallery. It was a show. I had been working with granite, and I finally thought, I need to use something that has a little bit of a warmer feeling and quality. So believe it or not, you can go to a quarry inside the park around the Grand Canyon, and they sell this sort of sandstone, and they usually use it for flagstone on patios in Arizona, I don't know, someplace warm, because you don't use it outside in the cold weather. But it was an installation that was done. And I like the idea of the two circles intersecting with each other. And then in 2005, I was asked to go out to a property in Kent, Connecticut. And there's a hill. This property is unusual. It backs up, there's quite a steep hill, sort of a mountain, I guess, with a giant waterfall coming down in a creek. And then there's this fancy architect-designed house by Charles Gwathmey. It looks like a piece of sculpture. It's really beautiful, and you don't want to do anything too close to it. So I thought, well, that's interesting. What am I going to do? Got this waterfall and mature trees, like 80, 90-foot trees. That's the other thing about working outdoors. Unless you're working in a plaza somewhere, you really have all this to contend with. Well, I decided I was going to work with granite because it's the same color as most of the granite walls in New England, but it's not the same granite. It's from Minnesota. And so I go out to the quarry, I find an area where and I go with someone who knows what they're looking at, and after all these years, I know a little bit too, so I can tell what color block I want to use. Then they take the block, it's about 100 miles from where the fabricating place is, and they bring it in. But that looked like a good block to me, and that's how it gets started. And then you have to also work with an engineer to engineer how it's going to stay up, or what it's going to stand on. So you kind of destroy this beautiful hill to put this foundation in, and then you see the pins, and the rocks all get, the columns all get drilled and lifted in and put down. So that's the process. And sometimes you work with people you just don't expect. These were a bunch of cowboys, really. They were really off the wall. And I usually feel that anyway, they did a good job, did a really good job. Scared the hell out of me half the time, but it was really, and these things swinging around, it's not, they can take down half the house, and anyway, that's what it looks like when it's all done. And it was really a nice experience altogether, and that's leaning on my work. And that's it. Oh, wait, one more. That's what it looks like in the snow. And that's the nice thing about outdoor work. It changes all the time. Thank you very much. And like before, I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Anybody? Any questions? Well, yes?
As the artist and engineering like that last piece, who pays for
Who pays for it?
that part of price, or how does that?
I work like an architect works. An architect has to consult with engineers, structural, mechanical, all these things. Whatever I need, like if there were water associated with that, there was a water consultant I'd use. So I have a fee. I have a design fee that I get, and then there's a oversight fee, installation, and it's that. And I don't, if the project costs $1 million, my fee is still the same as if it cost $500,000. It doesn't matter. I have a fee, and that's the way it works. So nobody feels that I'm trying to make more out of something to, raise my fee. Maybe that's not the smartest way to work, I don't know, but you kind of make it up as you go along like everything else. Is there anything else? Yes?
Well, I was interested in the business aspect of it. You said nobody had come to call. But you do have a gallery, so you can...
I don't work with Gagosian any longer. I started, believe it or not, Larry Gagosian went to UCLA, and he opened his first little gallery in Westwood, right by the college, and I had one of my first shows there, and I showed 5 or 6 times in LA with him, and then when he came to New York, I had 3 or 4 shows with him. But for whatever reason, we parted ways, and that was fine. Anything else?
Other materials that you work with?
Well, in terms of sculpture, no. I went to India, I saw all these carved stone structures that were carved out of living rock, and I mean, they were just amazing. And I went to India as a painter and photographer, and I came back and I just said, I'm not painting anymore, I want to work with stone. And I just started doing temporary things in small venues and stuff with found rocks, you know. And then little by little, you get some credibility. And once you build something, then other people come to you and you have something, I don't know.
So is there a major stylistic transformation or philosophical transformation when you shifted media?
Well, I had been interested in archaeology, just interested in archaeology, and I had, for a long time, a boyfriend who was an architect, and he had lived in Japan and other places before we got together, and he had a great library, and I was really taken with some of the ideas I was reading about, and I had never really had a traditional art history background, but I began going to classes in architectural history and stuff, and something was opening up that I hadn't planned on, and I liked the idea of working out in the real world, you know. Now I like the idea of being in my studio more, but for a long time it was exciting. You know, you met very sophisticated people, other design professionals, architects, graphic people, whatever, and it was an expansion. It was taking you have a sensibility, but you're taking it out into another realm and meeting people. And I had a number of years of being alone in my studio forever, and I like the change. I like that. But it's not for everyone, and it can be very upsetting and frustrating, and you don't know. Sometimes it's like a bad marriage. You know, you're thrown together with an engineer, a landscape architect, an architect, and sometimes they don't get along and you don't get along, and oh my God, everything goes to hell. I mean, really, very quickly. And you've got to come up with something, and it's like pulling teeth. Like a project, one of my failures was a project I did in Los Angeles. I don't even show it because it was a disaster. Nobody listened to me, so, well, that's another story.
That was a question I had. You're working with big things, masculine. I mean,
Yeah.
in a masculine
Oh my gosh, yes. I can tell you, I'll tell you a story. This has actually happened. Our first project that was serious, a real project, came about through the National Endowment for the Arts back in the 70s and 80s, kept artist slides on file. And I had made these mock-ups of working with stone. They were not real, they were mock-ups. I mean, I could make little people, like you saw, but I made them with, anyway, the National Geographic Society was looking for an artist to do the plaza for their new building in Washington, D.C., and they wanted an artist to work with stone. And aside from Isamu Noguchi and Michael Heiser, there was me. But they didn't know that I didn't do it yet. But they came to my studio in New York, and they said, what would you do? I said, well, if you want me to, I'll make a proposal. And because I didn't know what I was doing, I proposed something that was so impossible, but it looked so good, and they had so much money, they said, great, we'll do that. And then the architect was Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And the guy in charge said, you don't realize it because you don't know anything. And he knew I didn't know anything. He says, we're going to make this work and it's going to change your life. And it did. It was a great success, got a lot of publicity, a lot of press, and it was, it was a grouping of rocks, but one was 10 feet tall, 10 feet wide, 8 feet deep, weighed 220,000 pounds. To get it on site, they had to shore up all of the sewers that the truck was going to go. I mean, did I know? You know, but once you learn that stuff, you can't unknow it. So you have to own it. So I went out to Cold Spring with the architect guy, and they said, okay, the people there introduced me to the guy who's going to be doing the fabrication. And he's an older man, he was wearing a tool belt, you know. He looks at me up and down, he takes his tool belt off, throws it on the ground, turns around and walked away. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do now? So I came up with an idea. I was teaching at the time, and I had a grad student who was this big football player kind of guy. And I said, I'm going out there again in a couple weeks, and you're going out with me, and I'm going to talk to you, and you're going to talk to Fritz. And that's how it worked. And it worked that way for a couple of months. And every time I went out, he came with me. And, you know, he didn't know what he was saying, but it didn't matter. he was a big guy, and he could make it happen. So, but like I said, once you get something done, people take you more seriously. So. You know, I still have the same people. I can't throw them away. They're in a drawer. I know exactly where they are. No, I didn't name them. But I kept them. Yeah.
Your work downstairs, and there in it was a photograph of some beautiful stonework in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you also said you went to India. Where were some of the other places that you've been to find inspiration?
The inspiration for a lot of the sculptures like Font and the ones with the pillars and the were from Egypt. I spent time in Egypt. And I went to Peru, and I had a fellowship and lived in Japan for a year before I got married. I was in New York, but and we were dating each other, but I got this fellowship, and I really wanted to spend time in Japan. And I don't know, anywhere that I could go. Whoops, sorry. Yeah. So, travel has been important to me. Yes, in the back?
You're working with this one particular quarry up in art. Other artists working up there, or you?
Yeah. Well, once I got to be working up there, there was all of a sudden a number of people got to work up there. So yeah, it was. There's a German guy named Ulrich Ruckrehm, whose work I really admire, and he worked up at Cold Spring for a couple of commissions he had in the States. But lots of architects. I mean, that's their major business, is architect stuff. So, well, I really appreciate, you've been a very nice audience. Thank you.